Welcome to the Crunch McDabble Show. I'm your host, Crunch McDabbles. This is the only show where we break down the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules and answer all the toughest questions that are out there. And today's show is Wisdom a dump stat for clerics? I've been wondering about this question ever since 2nd Edition came out, and I noticed there was no longer a minimum ability score required to cast spells. If you remember back in 1st edition, you needed to have a minimum ability score of 10 plus the level of the spell you were trying to cast. So for a cleric to cast 2nd level spells, you needed to have a wisdom of 12 or whatever. So you couldn't really dump wisdom. It wasn't an option. But this wasn't a part of 2nd edition. So you could potentially have a wisdom of 10 and cast any level spell right up to 10th level spells with no problem. In 2nd edition, there was another feature added as well. With the Divine Font feature, your Charisma ability score suddenly became much more important. Divine Font gives you 1 plus your Charisma modifier and bonus spells to heal or harm spells. This class feature makes a cleric unlike any other class and gives them way more spells than all the other casting classes, even the castiest of classes. More spells is just better. For example, if you have a 16 wisdom at 1st level, you have 4 more 1st level spells, albeit they're all heal spells, but heal is a great spell. So does this make charisma a more important stat for clerics than wisdom? Well, let's look at what wisdom gives you. Wisdom is tied to several things. It adds to your will saving throw, and clerics get master proficiency in will saves, making them hard to mentally dominate. Also, wisdom is tied to some important skills like religion, and of course perception, which may be important to your character build. But most importantly, wisdom is tied to your spell attacks and spell DCs. So if you dump wisdom, you're giving up using spells for damaging monsters and DC spells for crowd controlling them. So is this a deal breaker then? Is it a bad idea to dump the stat that is tied to your spell's effectiveness against enemy monsters? Not necessarily. If you avoid casting spell attacks and spells with a DC, it wouldn't matter that you had a low wisdom. So you could stick to healing and buffing with your spells, and a low wisdom wouldn't impact you. So let's look at all the ways that players contribute in combat to illustrate this. Let's look at all the different things that characters in Pathfinder 2nd edition could be good at. We're going to focus in just on combat. First, there's damaging monsters. This is broken down into melee attacks, ranged attacks, and spell attacks. Then there's defense against monster attacks. This is broken down into armor class, saving throws, hit points, and damage mitigation. Then there is battlefield control against monsters. This is broken down into crowd control spells, combat maneuvers, and debuffs. And then there is battlefield assistance to other players. This includes buffs, healing, and any kind of battlefield aid and positioning. So for combat, these are all the ways players contribute. Now, any character you make, you're going to try and be as good at as many of these things as you can, but you can't do everything, right? That's what makes these games a challenge. All the different classes and builds with all their strengths and weaknesses, they all need to work together. Now, our question is, what is the cleric good at on this spectrum? What do they do naturally right out of the box? What are they naturally built to do? You can tell what character classes are good at by looking at what they progress at the best. A simple way to do this would be looking at all the abilities that they progress to legendary or master. The fighter, for example, progresses to legendary weapon proficiency. Therefore, we can conclude that they are good at, they're designed for damaging monsters with melee or ranged attacks. That's what they're designed to do naturally. So what is the cleric good at? The cleric's strongest class feature, the only thing that they could advance to legendary in, is their spellcasting. Now, spellcasting fits all over the place on the graph. It could include buffing and healing. It could include damaging monsters with spell attacks and battlefield control with crowd control spells. As we pointed out, buff and healing spells aren't affected by wisdom, so all spellcasting on this side of the graph is fine. But what we want to know is, how good is a cleric on this side of the graph, on the side that requires a high wisdom to be successful? We want to know this because we want to know what we are giving up if we dump wisdom. So the question is a casting cleric as good of a caster as, say, a wizard? Let's take a look. Let's compare a casting cleric with a wizard. So we build a cloistered cleric with an 18 wisdom and a 16 charisma. They would be great at healing, there's no question about that. They're starting out with an 18 wisdom, just like this wizard is starting out with an 18 intelligence. So at first level, they would have the same spell attack and same spell DC as a wizard. At 5th level, they both add one more to their abilities, making them the same again. At 7th level, both the wizard and the cleric would advance to expert spellcaster, giving them both the same 4+ level to spell attacks and spell DCs. And at 10th level and 15th level, they both add more points to their abilities, making them the same again. And then at 15th level, they both progress to master spellcasting. And then at 19th level, they both progress to legendary spellcasting. So they're right on par with each other. This means that the cloistered cleric can keep up with the wizard in damage and crowd control spells as long as they don't dump wisdom. So the cloistered cleric can contribute on this side of the graph. They can help the party by delivering spell attacks and crowd control attacks, and they contribute with the same aptitude as a wizard or other casting class. But the cloistered cleric loses out on the other side of the graphic. They aren't going to have as many hit points or as much armor class as a battle cleric. As a result, they are likely to hide in the back of the party with the wizards. This means, while they may help out on the damaging side of the graph, they aren't going to help out with hit points, defense, positioning, and getting flanks for all the other martial classes. So there is a trade-off. But now we want to know, could we potentially help out damaging monsters on this side of the graph, not with our spells and spell DCs, but with some kind of physical attacks and athletic maneuvers, like a fighter? In other words, if we dump wisdom and put points into strength and constitution, can we still help out on this side of the graph? Let's break that down and take a look. Okay, our battle cleric starts off with a 16 strength, while all the other classes start out with 18. So right away, all the martials are all +1 to hit and damage better. The battle cleric is trained with their weapon, and the martial classes are also trained, and the fighter is expert. At 5th level, the cleric can add +2 to their strength, bringing it from 16 to 18, while the other martial classes can only add 1 to their strength. So for now, their bonuses are all the same at +4. But also at 5th level, all the martial classes advance in proficiency rank training to expert and master, giving them all +2 more to hit. At 7th level, the battle cleric advances to expert training, so that's good. They catch up with the other classes, but at this level, all the martial classes get weapon specialization, giving them more damage on each hit. So it's like they can't win. At 10th level, ability scores increase, and at this time, all the martials advance to 20, giving them a +5 to hit and damage, but the battle cleric's now behind one again at 19 strength. At 13th level, all the martials, they all gain another proficiency bump, advancing to master and legendary. This increased proficiency adds 2 more to their 2 hit, but it also adds to their damage from weapon specialization. The cleric also gets weapon specialization at 13th level, but they only get 2 more damage per hit because they only have expert proficiency. At 15th level, the cleric catches up on ability, finally getting 20 strength, cutting off the difference back to +2 away from the martials and +4 away from the fighters. But at this level, all the martial classes get greater weapon specialization, giving them +6 to damage per hit, and the fighter even gets +8 to damage per hit. Since the cleric still only gets +2 to damage from weapon specialization, this is a net gain for the martial classes of +4 or +6 extra damage per hit. And then at 20th level, the martials all move up to 22 strength, giving them another +1 to hit and +1 to damage. So what we see here, even if the cleric, the battle cleric, focuses in on the damaging monsters in combat with weapons, even if they dump wisdom and put points into strength and constitution, they're going to be behind the other martial classes. So the conclusion is, it all comes down to where you want your build to contribute. If you want to fully contribute to damage and crowd control, in other words, to things on this side of the graph, then an 18 wisdom cloistered cleric is the way to go. But that build is giving up some on the other side of the graph with lower defense and lower survivability. Now you could build a battle cleric with an 18 wisdom. That would be sort of a compromise between both sides. This would be pretty good all over the place. Your spells would be okay, not as great as a cloistered cleric, but not completely useless either. Your defense and survivability would all be good, and that would allow you to contribute in positioning, so all that's good. It would be a good, well-rounded build. But you could also dump wisdom with your battle cleric. It is an option. It would really cut off your ability to contribute with casting damaging spells and DC spells, which is a drawback, but it could also make you that much better on the other side of the graph, rerouting all those wisdom points into constitution and charisma. This could allow you to focus in on healing, buffing, and survivability. This would allow you to survive to continue to dish out healing when the party needs it most, as opposed to the cloistered cleric, who is surely going to get smacked down the moment the mobs breach the front line. So by contrast, you are the front line, protecting the casters, providing flanks, soaking up damage, and providing timely heals and buffs. So it's an interesting way to play. You just have to know what you're giving up and then build accordingly. So to the question, is wisdom a dump stat for clerics? The answer is, it could be. And that's it. I'm Crunch McDabbles. This has been the Crunch McDabble Show. Be safe out there. Galarian is trying to kill you, outright kill you. So stand up for yourselves with this real knowledge to help you in that imaginary world.